All right, we're back. We're here to decide if it's time to cut our dough. So it's been about 3.5 hours since we started mixing it, since we put the levain in. We've kept it nice and warm. It has grown significantly. You can see a lot of doming and you can see a lot of bubbles. So I'm thinking it might be ready to cut. Now this is sometimes, I think, one of the hardest things for home bakers, because if you cut too early, there's really no way to recover and it can be kind of fatal. That's how you get flat loaves. You don't get that rise, you don't get the pop, you don't get the crumb. So in general, I say when in doubt, just wait. Wait another 10 minutes, 15. The biggest thing you really want to look for is when you want it to noticeably grow in size and look active with bubbles and kind of doming. If it looks flat, like it hasn't really grown much, definitely not ready to cut yet. One way to check is to do what we call a float test. So you're gonna wanna get a bowl of cold fresh water and you're gonna break off a little piece of dough and you're gonna see if it floats. If it floats, it means it has enough air in it that the fermentation is far enough along that you can probably cut it. So I'm gonna try to break off a piece of dough here without deflating it any more than I really have to, and see if it floats. So I don't know if you can see that, but it just bobbed to the surface there really quickly. So I have a pretty strong float. So I have a good idea that my dough is probably ready to cut. If your dough sinks a little bit or is hesitant to cut, I'd say you probably want to wait. One of the harder things at home is keeping it warm enough and keeping it moving. At the bakery, sometimes we'll cut it before it really floats or just when it floats. I like to wait for it to solid float. But if we have a ton of dough to get through, sometimes we need to cut it just so we have time to get through everything. But at home, you're not in any rush. There's no pressure. You're better off erring on the side of letting it get a little bit fluffier instead of cutting it too early. If you do cut it too early and you're starting to shape it and it feels small and there aren't a lot of bubbles in it and maybe it's a little cool, you don't think it's ready, the best thing to do is just treat it like a fish that's under limit and throw it back in. Put it back in the bowl, keep it someplace warm. It will ferment better in bulk than it will separately. So really just put it back in, treat it like a turn, give it another 20 or 30 minutes for the gluten to relax and for it to grow a little bit, and come back and check again. But this is strongly floating, it's pretty domed, it's pretty airy. I think it's good to go. So we're gonna go ahead and cut it. So I'm gonna turn this out on my work surface here. And as I'm pulling this away, I can see that there's not lots of bubbles in there. It looks nice. It looks like it's moving. I think it's gonna be bread. So we're gonna set that aside. So now I have my piece of dough here. We made enough dough for 2 1-kilo loaves, roughly. I'm just gonna do it by eye and divide it in half. I'm not worried about these being exactly perfect. So I've got about half my dough here and about half my dough here. Now, you're doing this pre-shaping before you shape to kind of start to train the loaf into the shape it's gonna be. And give it kind of one last strengthening. So what you're gonna try to do here is just round off the loaf and build a little tension and just let it rest. So I start about 5 o'clock with my bench knife and then use the tension of the dough on the table to build tension over the top of the dough. And you don't wanna do this too much because you'll start tearing the dough and deflating the loaf. So just do it. It doesn't have to be perfect. Do it until it's holding a round shape there. You can let it rest next to its buddy. Now you want to give it about 20 minutes after this phase, at least. You can give it 40 minutes if it's holding up well, or if it feels really stiff and needs to relax a little extra. But at least 20 minutes for all the gluten strength you just built there to relax so that you can build more strength in that final shape. So we'll come back in 20 minutes.